Good evening. Today is January 14th, 2013. This is a meeting of the Legislative Affairs Subcommittee of the Revere City Council. I ask that everyone please rise and salute the flag. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Tonight we're joined by members of the committee and some members who are not on the committee. For committee members, we have Councilor Giannino, Councilor Guanasso, Councilor Powers, and also in attendance is Councilor Correggio, Councilor Haas, and Council President Ira Novoselsky. We have one item on the agenda today. It is an ordinance amending the City of Revere's sewer use regulations. We had a meeting last month regarding this issue, and we asked for some more information from CDM, and we've received that information thanks to the help of the clerk. And I think everybody in the committee has been given this breakdown of what the ordinance is actually doing. So with that, I'm going to open it up. We have Bob Button in the audience and our city planner, Frank Stringy. I'll open it up to you guys if you want to come address the council, and I know some councilors have some questions, so we'll open it up to you guys.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks to our city clerk, the amendments have been redlined within the existing ordinance, so it's easy to read. I think that was a problem last time, trying to find out where they were placed in the ordinance. Not to reiterate, this is a requirement as part of our EPA consent decree order to bring our existing sewer use ordinance up to snuff with existing requirements in federal laws. One missing item last time in our sewer use ordinance was illicit connections via sump pumps in people's basements that are directly connected to the sewer system rather to an outside drainage source or out to the yard. So that was the main meat of the ordinance, to include sump pumps and do a lot of other housekeeping requirements, basically bringing us in order with the federal laws. So it's pretty clean and simple, but I think the main issue was the sump pumps and how they directly can affect the homeowners. A lot of homeowners, residents in the city, have purchased homes with these sump pumps already connected to the sewer system. And the whole idea is not to penalize the homeowner, but we had to, by law, put it in our illicit connection ordinance because it is an illicit connection. What we have been successful in doing is through the state revolving loan fund, our SRF fund with DEP, we have been doing a number of improvements citywide, undertaking infiltration improvements, lining sewers. We have also disconnected a number of direct connections via sump pumps and area drains that go into our sewer system. We haven't embarked on a citywide house-to-house inspection to locate sump pumps to date. What my office in the DPW has been doing, we've been working with the city's plumbing inspector, and as the plumbing inspector goes in and does inspections, he inspects also for sump pumps. As they're noted, the sump pumps are removed by the property owner at that time. And a lot of these are very simple fixes. It's a matter of taking the sump pump that may be connected to a slop sink in the basement and running the hose outside a window to the yard or to the driveway, which comes into the gutter line in our drainage system. So what we've been working with CDM is to undertake a more aggressive program going after these sump pumps, which contribute a lot of inflow into our sewer system. And all that extraneous flow just backs up our system. And all the work we do in the streets, relining pipes, removing direct connections from catch basins and area drains and people's roof leaders is all good work, and it's all making a big difference in our sewer system. But if we don't target the sump pumps, we're just, treading water here. So working with CDM, we're going to undertake an effort to use SRF funds to help homeowners eliminate these sump pumps. So it's not really a scare tactic. It's just a matter that we had to put it in the ordinance because EPA saw it and they reviewed our ordinance. They said, you don't have that in there. It has to be in there. So I hope that answers some of your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Turgi. We've also been joined by Councilor Reardon, who is a member of the committee. I'm going to open it up to councilors if they have any questions. Councilor Reardon.
Frank, last time we discussed this matter, we discussed the provision of funds, and you may have referenced it before I walked in. Excuse me if you have. And you just said now that that in consequence with the inspections, regular inspections, for instance, for new plumbing work, I assume you mean for anything that the plumbing inspector needs to go as a result of a permit application, I would assume. He is also taking cognizance of any sump pumps. Is that?
That's correct.
That's accurate. And then he's asking them to or telling the resident or the homeowner that he has to remediate that within a certain number of days, I assume.
That's correct. We send out an enforcement order that requires within 30 days to have that removed.
All right. Now, the last time you were here, you said that as this process goes forward with the testing, various testing from the street, that there will be some funds available to assist homeowners to some extent, and that was kind of left to me, and maybe it was intentionally, or maybe it was because this simply program has not been set up yet, but it's kind of nebulous at this point as to what that is going to mean. Is that going to mean actual cash dollars? How is that going to be dealt with? And the second part of the question is obviously people who now suffering the, and I'll use the term loosely, suffering, the plumbing inspector coming in and telling them they have to do that now won't be obviously eligible for funds that simply haven't been set up yet. So how do we address that?
I'll have Bob Button answer the meat of that question.
Thank you for the question, Councilor. The city, back in August of 2012, applied for another round of SRF, state revolving loan funding, and we actually put in a specific, a specific funding request that would provide a pool of money for residents citywide to deal with these sump pump issues. And Frank is correct. In many cases, it's very easy. It's as simple as disconnecting your hose and running it out to the street. In some areas of the city, it could be a little more complicated, so there's not sort of one fixes everything, if you will. And what we're trying to do is work with homeowners so that the more complicated fixes are something that the city can help with, and the sort of no-cost fix of just redirecting where the hose goes is something that a homeowner could and should do on his own. In the case of all the work we did in the Washington Street area on Goldie and Bruno and all those streets, as part of the work that we did putting in the new sewer and drainage systems, we went into the homes, and there was a handful of folks who we worked with them to redirect their sump pumps again out into the yards. And in areas where there's a grassy lawn and there's some spaces between the homes, that's obviously much easier to do than in areas where it's much tighter or where a sump pump may go out across a sidewalk and create an icing condition. So in those types of instances, that's where we're looking to use this program going forward. There may be a few people sort of caught in this couple of month time gap between where these two programs come together, but I think we have some flexibility to work with those folks if we came up with a situation where 30 days wasn't quite enough, or where we knew we had a project to come in and do some work in a neighborhood, we could maybe tie the two together. So that's how we're looking at that funding issue.
All right, well, then that gets me to the point where you're saying a couple of months period. Are we anticipating these funds will be available in something like that time frame?
Yes. What happens, Councilor, is when we applied back in August, every year, the SRF program, they'll come out with what they call the draft intended use plan, which is all the projects that are funded throughout the state. That typically comes out in the January timeframe, late January, early February. So we should be seeing that list very, very shortly. Then what happens is the state has a series of public hearings, and then we will actually come back before this body before June 30th for approval to utilize that money, as we've done over the last couple of years. So we will be coming back before this body between now and the end of the fiscal year with the request to make that funding available for use by the city.
So then from that, I gather that we're not anticipating the funds actually be available till the beginning of the next fiscal year.
That's correct.
All right. So when that does become a reality, assuming it does become a reality, you will have a plan in place as to how the money is going to be expended. And in other words, proportionally, for instance, 20% of the fix, the funds will cover us, whatever that happens to
And
be.
it depends, because there's a wide variety. The simple hose disconnect is effectively zero cost, whereas something that's more complicated has a cost, and that can vary, pretty widely between the locations and the homes. So we would be working with homeowners to try to come up with the right formula. As Frank said, this isn't intended to be punitive.
Right.
In fact, it's actually intended to help the city reduce overall costs, because if we didn't take this water that shouldn't be in the pipes out of the pipes, we would have to go around the city and make all the pipes bigger to handle this flow when it rains, so that we don't have these SSOs popping out of the city. That's really the issue. That flow shouldn't be in the pipes, so we either have to get it out or we have to make the pipes bigger, and it's significantly less expensive to take it out than it is to go out throughout the whole city and make every pipe bigger, if you will.
So when, one more clarification, when you do come forward with us asking us to approve the initial request,
Yes.
will you have in mind how you're going to address these remediation issues more specifically? In other words, or is this just going to be someone comes in and says, look, I have this issue, I have a hose, I have no place to put it outside my property, for instance, I have no window to throw it out. What can I do? I have to obviously drill a hole through the foundation or something like that. Are you going to have some idea of how you're going to manage that financially with the homeowner?
Every case will vary, but yes, we'll work with the homeowners and we'll have a plan. The other thing that the funding allows is, many of you recall, we did the smoke testing throughout the city, and we found certain things when we were doing that smoke testing. You don't always see sump pumps, but sometimes you can see that through some of the testing that we've done. And we will actually set up a program where we'll go through, using this ordinance and other mechanisms, go through houses throughout the city so that we can look for these sump pumps, so that we can actually take them out. So over the course of the 10 years that we have to do our consent decree compliance work, it'll be a combination of people coming in and describing a problem exactly as you've said, and the city going out to look for these problems, because that's what the consent decree mandates that we do. Sure.
Thank you, Councilor Reardon. Councilor Powers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Bob, these funds you're talking about, are they part of the SRF fund?
Yes, they are.
So they are paid back to the city at a lower percentage rate, approximately what, 2%?
That's correct. It's a 2% loan program, yes.
Okay. How much money do you anticipate? And I know you can't answer me exactly this evening, but how much money do you anticipate being available to address the situation?
If my memory serves me correct, I believe the number we asked for was $5 million for this initial phase. So it will allow us to do a very significant amount of work throughout the city. It probably won't get us to every single sump pump in the city, but it's a major investment in a sump pump program for the city.
Now, I notice you've been doing some relining down
Yes.
in the Point of Pines section,
Yes.
and Oak Island section recently.
Yes, we have.
During that relining, have you identified any areas that...
We have identified a couple of things as we've been doing the relining work, and as we were doing the investigations out in that area. We found what is called direct inflow sources. We've found a couple of drains and manholes where the ocean water, the saline salt water, can actually, at a certain tide, get up into the sewer system. So we found those types of conditions. Along the parkway, 107, we found, 1A, I'm sorry, we found collapsed pipe in a couple of areas where a lot of seawater was getting in. So we found those types of inflow, direct inflow sources, as well as sump pumps. We've also spoken with a couple of homeowners out in the area who've made comments to us about their sump pumps. The intent of the program was to make sure that the pipes in the street don't leak, so it's a part of the solution that we have to implement. We will be going back to do additional lining work and to do sump pump removals over the course of the next several years. So,
Now, is that $5 million you're talking about, is part of that money going to be used for the relining on the streets, I would assume?
no, there's a separate fund. That $5 million that we're talking about will just allow us to do sump pumps throughout the city. There's a fairly significant investment that the city will have to make in sump pump removals and in some instances, Councilor, making so there are drainage systems so that the sump pump can maybe be hard piped to a drain instead of a sewer, and that's where some of the costs get to be higher, because you then have to put in that drain as well, but that'll deal with conditions of icing of the sidewalks and those types of things. So it's going to vary depending on where you are in the city.
My concern is, and I think it's a very valid concern, is that many of the homeowners in this city, particularly in those older areas, may not even be aware that those drains are going out into the sewers.
Yes, I would believe that.
And many of them are retirees. They're already facing high water and sewer bills.
Sure.
Okay? Part of those water and sewer bills, part of that money is being used to pay down the bonded debt on sewer and water improvements. And I'm just wondering if in some areas where, and particularly where the city ultimately is going to wind up with a savings, because this is water that's not going to be pumped out into Deer Island,
Exactly.
which is going to reduce our sewer bills. Am I correct?
That's absolutely correct, Councilor, yes.
So I'm just wondering if part of that savings couldn't be directed toward the grants or the SRF monies we'd be getting from the state to help defray the taxpayers' burden, particularly for the, and I know you can't single people out, but there are an awful lot of retirees in this city, a lot of people that are living on fixed incomes. They're being faced with water and sewer bills that are a couple of $1,000s a year now, that if you go back 20 years, they were only $100, maybe if that.
Absolutely.
So I'm just wondering if, and that's something that CDM might be discussing with the administration and Frank Stringy to give some relief to those people out there that, I know if a retiree is all of a sudden hit with a $3,000 bill to change a system or something like that, a lot of people can't afford that.
Yes.
So I would just hope that we're looking in that direction to help these people out.
We absolutely are. We're working with Frank's office as well as Nick Rystrom in engineering and Donnie Goodwin in DPW to do that, to try to fix the problems in a priority order where we get the biggest problems first so that we have the maximum impact in terms of cost savings, and then to look at ways that we can do the construction very efficiently so that we can save homeowners money, as you described.
Just one last question. There was a problem down on Whitten Avenue, I understand, where you had seawater coming in down there.
Yep.
Is that being addressed?
Yes, I believe DPW has already, or if they haven't, they're in the process of bricking up a manhole, and then we're doing some lining work out in that area so that when we fix with the brick, we then also add some additional protection with the lining work as well.
Thank you very much, Mr. Button.
My pleasure, Councilor.
Thank you, Councilor Powers. Councilor Guanasso.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Notwithstanding the court degree that consent order that was levied upon the city, we're going to whack the taxpayer twice. Number one, they're paying for this humongous fine that the federal government placed upon us, and there again, we're going to be required to fix all the wrongdoings that have occurred over the past 50 to 75 years.
Yeah.
As was stated previously, and not to overstate it again, but there are many homeowners within our community that are elderly and fixed budgets and fixed income, and they're being placed in an awful position. And I also have another, over and above the amount of monies that's going to cost the taxpayer and the homeowner. I had a conversation a couple of weeks ago with Councilor Reardon, and he brought out some very valid points in terms of this runoff, what effect it's going to do to not only their neighbors, but anybody who traverses the area in terms of icy conditions, placing a very serious public safety factor among our whole city. And the thing I'm concerned about is we don't know the amount of activity that's really going to be required to control this, because this is going to be substantial. I would suggest very strongly that probably a good 50% or better of our community has sub pumps.
I think you're very accurate with that, yes.
And I think that a greater percentage of those are connected to the city system. We're going to experience something that we've never had before. We're going to have neighbor pitted against neighbor based on the fact that this neighbor to my right might not have a sub pump and not have an awareness of flooding in the area, but then I'm flooding them out and I'm icing them out all winter. It's going to not like that. Neighbors are not going to like that. And you're going to put nice neighbors against nice neighbors. I'm just concerned about, I think the city is placing a little bit of responsibility on all the homeowners and saying all the wrongdoings that occurred. The suggestion is, why didn't the city go for storm sewer? Make that larger. Make that storm sewer system larger, as they would probably do in other communities if they affluent communities. I know we don't have the money to do that, but I'm just saying that we're all living with an infrastructure that's 100 years old, and we hit certain areas of the city where we're seeing pipes being dug up on a daily basis, and they're all decayed, and the water's going everywhere.
Yes.
Now, isn't that in effect somewhat damaging the court degree? Isn't that somewhat that's damaging the quality, the runoff is going illegally into the system that the city and the state and the country doesn't want, the federal government doesn't want? How many of those pipes are incorrectly working, inadequate in functioning? And what kind of drain does that put on the system? I bet, and I'd be willing to wager, that that's greater than these sub pumps that are putting homeowners that are hooked up to the city system. I bet that the old infrastructure piping is in worse condition than that we're really talking about. And I think that it behooves us to fix that, and then come back and say to the homeowner, okay, we've got the proper storm sewer piping in place. Now you do the right thing. But I think the city ought to act on good faith, too, in addressing this runoff that's contaminating the water system. And I think that's a very valid concern, because I don't care where you dig up. When I go by and I see DPW addressing issues in the streets of our city, I see an old, decayed sewer line. I mean, I'm talking about fragment all over the place. And there's so many conversations I've had with homeowners over the past several years, that how many trees are uprooted and got into the system, and that's all been fragmented, and there's all kinds of leakage going on over there. So couple this all over our community, you're talking serious damage. I think we ought to do in-house and say, how about the storm system? Let's get those storm sewer in the proper condition, and then go address these issues to the homeowner. Because we're sort of passing the buck here. We're telling homeowners, you're doing something illegal, it's wrong now, and then we're going to put this ordinance in place, but yet the city sidesteps that. They're not responsible for all the leakages that they're doing. How do we address that?
I wouldn't say that the city's sidestepping their responsibility, and in fact, we've been
the city, I know, has an awareness that that's there.
And we're working very hard with the city to face all of those issues. I've said at council meetings in the past that the investment in the drainage system in many ways could equal or could even exceed the amount of money that we're going to spend in the sewer system, because actually the consent decree is both stormwater and sanitary sewer or sewage.
Right.
So we need to do both, and in many cases we will be enlarging the drainage pipe to allow capacity for this flow, because the pipe that we move it to from the sewer has to work as well. And there are areas in the city where there is no drainage. So in addition to making pipes bigger, we'll actually be adding drainage in several areas in the city. We're working on tide gates to make sure that tide gates don't leak, so that there's not water coming back up into the system. So there are a series of fixes that we're trying to work all in parallel so that we can have the maximum benefit as quickly as possible and try to save as much money as we can. Every gallon of rainwater or every gallon of groundwater that gets into your sewer system, the MWRA bills you for, because it goes through a meter.
That's an injustice in itself. And I noticed this past weekend on Saturday, namely on Saturday, that we had an extremely high water tide, and that the marshes were pretty full without having any water come down from above. And so that's brought in by the, and I noticed down in Hastings Street, it was kind of flooded. And I'm wondering what's occurring with that. I mean, there were no, we hadn't had rain for a while, and it was just a small amount that came down on Friday. But Saturday, it was completely flooded on Hastings Street down on at the end of Temple and Douglas Street. And I looked into the marsh, and the marsh was pretty flooded too. So that's evident that the tide was up, and where's this? We're paying for that too, going into the system.
When water leaks into the sewer system, yes.
That's insane. This is really an injustice to our taxpayer. We got to come up with something that, they come in with all these agencies. They have all this expertise, and they come down. Can't you just see what's occurring here? And why should the taxpayer have to pay for this? It's got nothing to do with anybody but nature, and we're paying for it. I mean, it doesn't make sense. And these consent decree orders are, to me, they're made up in an office by somebody who has no idea what the hell's going on in our community, or how people are being held to the grind on certain things financially. So I think there's a couple of issues out there that should be addressed before we vote this ordinance in and say, okay, we know everybody to the person knows we have a problem here. We do have a problem. Mm-hmm. But there's a couple of solutions, I think, that have to be really dealt with prior to us getting into making and creating an ordinance that says this is the way it's going to be.
I definitely understand and hear what you're saying, and I would say in certain areas of the city, we will, the order of how things are done will be different, in that you will have to make drainage system improvements in order to make all this work. The importance of making this ordinance change, as Frank had said, is it's something that EPA is looking for in the consent decree, and in areas of the city where in these first couple of years we can get sump pumps out and we can do it very effectively, cost effectively, without having to do a lot of other work. It will actually be a big benefit for the city, in that we'll be able to get a lot of water out at a lower cost. Some of the areas of the city where we have to add drainage, or where we may need a big stormwater pump station, for example, those are the areas where it'll take us a little more time to identify the funding and to work up solutions. So I would respectfully say, Council, that we need both. We need the ability to have some teeth so that homeowners homeowners and business owners, it's not just limited to your homeowners, but it's also businesses as well. We can force them to do the things that they need to do so that they're not unfairly hurting their neighbors by having that water in. At the same time, we are cognizant of the impact that it has on people that have issues with being able to pay for it, or issues where it creates icing. So I think that's something that we have already worked with engineering and planning and DPW on, and I would say that we would continue to do that moving forward.
Everybody wants to protect the future. Everybody wants to protect the environment for the future generations, and that's a good, loving thing. But I'm more concerned about what happens to the people that I represent today, and next week and the following week. I'm concerned about certain things. This is reality, and I think EPA sometimes strikes their magic hand with no compassion at all. And I think that's dangerous when someone has the right to strike a magic note without no compassion. I mean, I just think that people have to be more sensitive to the needs of individuals before they come up with these. And I, for one, I'm not voting for anything until I get some sort of answers, because I don't want to sanction, I don't want to be part and parcel to an ordinance that I'm really not sure that the city's not doing their half of it too. And I represent the people to this city. Mm-hmm. I don't represent the city. And so I'm representing my constituents.
Your constituents,
and
yes.
their beliefs and what they believe in, and how I can best adjust to what they need. In the same token, taking care of the city, but, being mindful that that's who my allegiance is to. And so that's where I'm on this. And I spoke with Councilor Reardon, and he made a lot of great valid points there a week or so ago in terms of the runoff and what it caused and creates to neighbors. And he had an understanding that night exactly the way I feel. And so I think it's a sensitivity issue, along with a monetary issue. It's something we ought to be concerned with.
I would absolutely agree with the concern and the sensitivity of the issue. I would say that there are constituents that you have and other councilors up here have that are negatively affected by the sump pumps, and by that I mean when the sewers fill up, you have a number of constituents throughout the city that will get SSO backups into their houses. So part of this ordinance is to actually help the people who get inches of sewage like your city clerk, inches of sewage in their basement when we have wet weather events.
I understand that, and I'm all for that. But I'm just saying that, the approach we take upon it, again, it's not all the homeowners' fault. It's some of the city's responsibility, too.
It's a shared responsibility, absolutely.
I mean, the city has to share in this, just like you said, share the responsibility. Don't place it all upon the homeowner. That's all I'm asking.
Yep, understood.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Button. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilor Guanasso. Councilor Has.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Back in the 90s, when I was mayor, we started this program originally. As Frank Stringy indicated, what we left out, and I don't want to say on purpose, but basically on purpose, was basically the sump pumps. Because all you had to do is go down to Ward 6, the lower ends down there that would flood every time you had a high tide. We realized that the cost, there was no programs in line as far as funding, but the cost would be prohibited because most of the driveways on Geneva, Toscano, et cetera, would drive down. So that meant they would have to dig up their whole driveway and repair it at their cost. Here we are 20 years later, and we're still addressing it, but now we're faced with a mandate by EPA. And I believe if it's not really approved as a new change within our system, we will be affected negatively from EPA because we already signed an agreement that we would spend X amount of dollars over the 10 years. Is that correct, Bob?
It is, and the agreement wasn't necessarily around a set of dollars. It was around solving the problem.
Right.
So that dollar value is something we're still working to determine, and the sump pumps are part of solving that problem that you just described. Yes, sir.
Yeah. Because again, if you look at, and it was mentioned earlier, roughly 50% of the homes in Revere have sump pumps.
I would
even
believe that.
people in the high elevations, they have it.
Yes.
Okay, you get sewage back up, you never know what's going to happen.
Yep.
We have to address those issues, and I'm glad that you indicated there's roughly $5 million that may be available for the sump pumps. That's going to help out, but I don't think it'll be adequately funded at $5 million. I think this is going to spend a lot more, especially in the lower end areas. It's great that you went up there with the company and determined a lot of open pits where water could just flow in. I remember down at the Chelsea Creek, we had a major problem down there, right near the ice skating rink, okay, wide open, the water would just come in as the tide would shift. I'm looking at this expense that the city will incur. Revere's an older community, and we look at tax rates going up, water rates going up. Now we're looking at funding the EPA, the $100 million, if that's a cost over 10 years. That's a lot of money. Now coupled with the fact that you're addressing this, and then You also mentioned, after this is implemented, we have this system going, we're going to have to look at increasing the diameter of all these, of all the major loops. I mean, when's it going to stop? I mean, we're an older community, there's no question about it. Errors were made 1900, 1920, 30, 50, all the way up to the present time, all right? It's great that we're addressing it, but I think our taxpayers in Revere have limited resources. The mandates coming down from the federal government, unfunded at that, which every mandate was supposed to be funded to some extent. Now, my taxpayers have to pay from the first dollar up. That's not fair to the people in Revere of errors that may have occurred 100 years ago, 50 years ago, et cetera. And I'm, wondering, when's it going to stop? Now, I understand you're only in this aspect of it. You're controlling the water, the illegal hookups, et cetera. I mean, you get things in my neighborhood where the city planted trees. It's all in the water system. My neighbors are cutting down the trees without going through any legal process. We used to have a tree individual who's responsible for tree wood, et cetera. Okay? They're just doing it because it's infiltrating their water system, which they have to pay to rectify. I mean, when's it going to end?
The when's it going to end is a
Never.
tough question. Yeah,
Right.
I'd like to say not never, because there's a horizon on this consent decree where we have an end date where we're trying to fix everything by. We are working with the mayor's office to try to extend that deadline so that it doesn't all come, in a shorter period of time for ratepayers. So we are working on that. We're also working with neighboring communities to look at things that the state can do. Are there regional drainage solutions along the Town Line Brook, for example, where there's maybe something that DCR or the Department of Transportation or other agencies can do to lessen the burden on Revere taxpayers and water and sewer ratepayers? So in addition to trying to fix the problems as quickly as we can and in the logical order, we're also looking at other ways to help the ratepayers offset these costs so that we can have a quality of life improvement for residents, so that when you get 2 inches of rain, you don't have to worry about 6 inches of sewage in your basement. That's not fair to people either, and really that's a major public health issue. That can make people very sick, little children, elderly people. It's very important that we balance it so that we eliminate those conditions. At the same time, we make provisions to do all the other things that are necessary.
But you mentioned Town Line Brook. That's been an issue for the past 60 years.
Yes.
The Commonwealth of Mass does not want on up to the fact that the cement pilings on the side is eroding. The floodgates are broken. I don't know why that's never a priority. We finally had them fixed 10 years ago, 12 years ago, and they should be that should be a priority of DCR. That affects all those people in the Malden area, Everett area, along the Town Line Brook, and Revere.
Yes, it does.
I mean, here we are, we're worrying about the small homeowner, but meanwhile, the Commonwealth of Mass is a major contributor to it. I mean, just this council spoke about the Saugus Marsh. Here we are, we're going by every EPA edict. Over in Saugus, they're dumping pure raw sewage and land into the harbor. So what's your defining line in the ocean? This is MWR clean area?
Yeah.
Dump it over here? That's crazy.
I don't disagree with you. I don't disagree at all. I will say that Mayor Rizzo has made it a priority to reach out to the state agencies and to re-educate them in terms of the importance of this this longstanding issue. Back in early December, the mayor and I met with Speaker DeLeo, Representative Reinstein, and Senator Petroselli, and one of the questions they asked is, how can we help the city of Revere? How can we help you with these types of issues? And what we said was, you can help us with funding for the DCR to meet some of the responsibilities that they have just for operations, let alone helping with special projects like maybe some work on the Town Line Brook tide gates, or maybe a pump station behind the tide gates so that you can pump the water down and put it up over the tide gates, as what happens out in Oak Island now. where the city mobilizes pumps out to pump around the tide gate. So those are the types of things that we're trying to do, working with the administration and the various city departments to, in cases where it's appropriate, get others who contribute to the problem to step up and help solve the problem. And they've been helpful in that regard.
Right. And one last comment, Mr. Chairman. Whenever we have heavy rain, I'm always down in that area. Make sure, number one, the floodgates are operational. Make sure the gates are clean. And I'm sure I'm not the only counselor, because we are aware of past history.
Where your problem areas are,
Exactly.
yes.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you.
Sure, my pleasure.
Thank you, Councilor Has. Councilor Correggio.
Thank you, Chairman Arrigo. Bob, thank you for coming before us and explaining this ordinance. I'm here to protect the homeowner and do what I can to assist them in every way possible. One of the major concerns is the city of Revere water table has changed over the years. The water table has changed that it's just a higher water table. In a lot of areas in the city, when it rains for a couple of days, the people are in a panic. They don't know what to do. They have sump pumps. They're trying to get rid of water, and they're not out to hurt anybody, but we need to assist those people in every which way with water, and whether it's a pumping station or something. So are you going to address some of those people in those low areas that all of a sudden the water table has changed and they're getting water and they have to put a sump pump and they have to put it someplace, the water? Can you explain that a little bit?
Sure, absolutely. We are working throughout the city to identify those sort of high priority areas where a lot of problems occur that cause a condition, where there's too much water in the pipe, where there's major flooding. So it's been the commitment that the city made to EPA, as well as our marching orders all along, to do the sort of low-hanging fruit, the projects where we can get the biggest bang for the buck, and that's what the last several years have been. As you move forward with the next 10 years of that program, of the consent decree compliance, that's exactly what we're going to try to do, is work with those homeowners, identify locations that need drainage work, that need sewage work, and try to do it in a way where if you come down a street to do sewer work or to fix a water main, you fix the water, you fix the sewer, you fix the drain, and then people are able to connect into the systems as the law requires, and in a way that will put sewage to go to the sewage plant and rainfall and stormwater runoff to go where it should go. So we will be doing just what you're suggesting, Councilor.
Yes, because that's been a big concern. I've been down to a lot of areas in Ward 6 and other areas through the city that people have called me for flooding, and they don't know what to do. They're in a panic, and they need some type of professional assistance with this, especially in the areas where the water table has changed. I mean, I think you should realize that the water table has changed in these areas, and it has to be addressed. And I mean, they're going to be constantly getting water and water. When it rains for 2 or 3 days, I mean, people in those areas are in a panic. So I don't want to see taxpayers being penalized for this problem. And also, I mean, we're paying the highest water rates in the city. I mean, it's really absurd what we're paying. I mean, something's got to be done, and to assist a lot of these taxpayers, what they're paying. Thank you.
Sure thing, Councilor.
Thank you, Councilor Correggio. Council President Novoselsky.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Bob, thanks for coming up, and Frank, thanks for coming up also. One thing I wanted to try and clear up is, if we were going to redirect a sump pump, you already said the low point could potentially be 0. What could be the maximum point?
Oh, boy.
Cost.
It's really a challenge, because in some areas you may have a high wall, for example, and you need to work around that wall. You have yards in the city that are very ornate in some instances, with nice landscaping and other things that drive up costs. So it really, sort of varies. Couple $3,000 for maybe $2,000, somewhere in that range.
Okay.
For
well, that's okay. Yeah, that's just looking for a ballpark, because some of the things I wanted to just discuss here is we talked about direct connection to the catch basins, and I'm in favor of that, and I encourage as many people to do it as possible, and we even do it now. We talk to people about getting it done. And one thing we have to be cognizant on, and Frank's ballpark too, when we do new sidewalks and streets. So I think we should encourage people to look, if they know street is going to get done, or if Frank knows a street or sidewalk is going to get done, to get it done before we do the new street, before we do the new sidewalk, so we don't, if we're going to make a connection out there, do it beforehand. So Frank and I talked about this with the gas company the other day, about giving people advance notice to do it before we do the side, if they wanted to go to convert to gas compared to oil. We want to let people, folks know, let's get it done, here's your opportunity, because once we do the sidewalk and once we do the street, it's going to be 5 to 7 years that you'll be able to touch it again. We don't want to ruin new streets or sidewalks on work like this.
You're absolutely correct, Councilor, and in fact, we've, for the last couple of years, coordinated some of the street work so that we would get in and sort of do it all first before you pave it, because you're just spending good money after bad if you're digging up a new road to fix something that you could have done a few months before. So you're absolutely correct with that approach.
And there's also the issue of utilizing French drains on someone's property, a dry well, whatever it takes to try and take the water somewhere. And that may be a cheaper way of doing it, just digging a hole, putting in some crushed stone and allowing it to flow that way, to filter out that way.
We've actually looked at a couple of locations in the city where that's exactly what the solution was a yard drain like that. It really depends on where you are and where the water table is and that type of thing.
I understand that 1,000%. And I know we're kind of encouraging people to put the drain, water, drain it out onto the sidewalk, which technically, even the inspectional services now are going out and violating people for doing that. So, it's a catch-22, and, what do you do in a case like that?
We generally try to encourage people to do it to side yards and or to the backyard as opposed to the front yard as a first resort.
Right.
There are instances where either the front yard is the only resort or it makes its way from the side yard, to the front just because it's a relatively small yard or yard area. We actually, as I've said at other meetings, I have an employee that lives in the city that we work with that has an issue with sump pumps and drains and how it all works in his home. So I've been in his basement looking at that issue, so I am aware of it.
And, a couple of things that came out tonight, and just let me state that I agree with everything that every council said here tonight, because we are concerned about our homeowners and the people that live here, and they can only afford so much, and I'm not going to repeat that in its entirety, because everybody gets the hint. We know it's there. I know that when you do lining and surveying sewer lines, that you still run into wooden pipes, or you run into that recently, or?
We've run into some very, very dilapidated corrugated metal pipes. I've seen wooden water pipe in other areas. There are drainage systems that are 50, 60, 70 years old plus in this city. And, typically those systems would normally be designed for 25 or 30 or 40-year lifespan. So they're already 150% of their lifespan. Nothing lasts forever, as everyone knows.
And what was mentioned about Councilor Haas, mentioning about trees and tree roots. Some of the trees are on people's property, and we really can't do much for that. That's something that they call roto-rooter and try and, spin them out. But what happens when we have a case on city property, when we have a sidewalk and, we put trees in, people want trees, and I know we try to watch where we put the trees now, make sure it's away from a water line, whether it be water feed or water drainage or sewer drainage lines coming out of the house. But, people are saying, well, it's a city tree, why should we have to pay for cleaning out our lines? This is what I get. This is what I get. And sometimes I don't have an answer, but I guess the responsibility of a person is up to the main connection, Frank? Is that right? Yeah. So. It's a disconnect or a difference between street pushback.
Sorry, yes, it's a disconnect or a difference between the street right-of-way and the responsibility for ownership of that utility out to the main. Many communities face a similar issue where the homeowner is responsible to the pipe in the street, so Revere is not unique in this instance, but the conditions you're describing are true, and we've seen those. In the instance, Councilor, of city sewer mains, we've actually been lining through areas where we've had root intrusions, so we have addressed it in mains, and in service connections, we go back, we call it a top hat, a few feet, so we may catch it in some areas, we may not catch it in every area.
Yeah, cool. And the two last things I want to mention, I know Councilor Granasso mentioned about, we're looking about voting on this ordinance and whether or not we want to really go ahead right now and really pound on the people as far as getting it done. I know there's a consent decree, and what if we don't pass this?
There are a couple of issues if you don't pass it. Number one, it'll make it harder for the city as a whole to do the work that's necessary, so it'll add time and cost and complexity to the work that in some instances will actually make it harder for the city to do things that they need to do. There are potentials for fines if the city doesn't do certain things throughout the consent decree. This is actually a double-sided copy of the consent decree, so there's a lot of information in here in terms of what the city needs to do and the ramifications of not doing things, meaning fines and those types of issues. When you look through the ordinance, we've tried to be consistent, so we've tried to make it consistent with other state laws. So for example, you'll notice that the previous fine was $10,000 per day for civil violations. We've actually ratcheted that down to $5,000. So you can be fined for more things, but the dollar value of the fine is in fact half of what it was before. So there are areas where this ordinance, and there's a lot of things that this ordinance does to improve things and to make it better for your constituents, and I would lobby you to say that the overall good that's done by the ordinance outweighs some of the negatives, but I am very aware of what the negatives are.
Thank you. And the last thing I want to address is Northeast Mosquito Control. I know they do a lot of dredging on some of the creeks and the drainage areas for surface water, basically. Now, from what I understand, we only put away like $35,000 a year to do dredging on some of the creeks, and I just used the creek behind the Garfield and behind Shaw's Market as potential areas to be done. But I know the one behind Shaw's is almost gone, and that's going to be a multi-million-dollar job, but in order to really get that done, because there's no water draining down there at all. And I know the Town Line Brook may be covered by them. Do they do dredging up there?
I'm not sure because because of the exact conditions. If mosquito control gets out there, I think it's too big for that, and it isn't some of the narrower channels where mosquito control is more active.
Behind my areas, they would, because they're so small and there's more water collection there.
And more ponding and creation of mosquitoes.
Because I know that the surface drainage that goes down there, if it doesn't drain out, is that something you're looking at also?
Yes, because one of the things we're trying to do is, in those instances where the ditches are full of sediment and debris, if that then causes water not to drain, that then raises the groundwater table, which causes people to potentially have a sump pump upstream of that. So something that's very important is maintenance of those drainage channels and those open ways. So that's another area where we're working with DPW and with the mayor's office to try to identify state resources that can help the city, because for relatively small dollars, if you can make that drainage channel work as it was supposed to, then it doesn't cause as many of the problems that people are seeing upstream. So there's definitely a benefit to cleaning out the pipes and cleaning out the drainage channels that we're looking at. And when the city, when you as councilors look at the fiscal 14 or 15 budgets for DPW, that's something that I would suggest that you need to keep in mind, is providing those types of resources so that more can be done, because that's a very cost-effective way of making some of these drainage systems work.
Excellent. And I just want to thank you for all your work. I know one particular area, my area, that you're working on is down on that Dick Street Lower Dick Street about the, the sewage issue down there. And I know that's, the people really would have got croaked down there if they had to put their own pumps in each house. So I'm glad we're looking at doing a central one and allowing it to drain in there and then pump it back up the street. So I think that's a good, positive thing so far for that area.
And we've been working, even on Christmas Day, the DPW director and I were going back and forth with some emails because we were getting alarms and certain things. So I know the city's working very hard on those issues.
And I appreciate it, and I know Donnie's doing a good job, and, he's really up on all this stuff. And I know we do the best we can with what we have to deal with. So thank you very much. Thank you,
My
Mr.
pleasure,
Chairman.
Councilor.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just have a couple of questions, and I appreciate the time that you've given to us to answer all of our questions. Do you have any idea, I know you talked about the $5 million that will be set aside. Do you have any idea how much it would cost to fix the problem total?
I was just trying to run through the number of housing units. If there are 12,000 structures within
Yeah.
the city and 50 or 60% of those structures have a sump pump issue of some kind or another.
Yep.
I can't tell you whether,
The maximum would be,
I'm sorry, I put that on.
you'd be looking at a maximum of probably maybe $20 million. So
I don't think it'd be that high,
that-
Counselor. It depends, because in some areas where you'd have to put in a new tide gate or a new pump station to make a drainage pipe work, that maybe would drive up the costs of the sump pump program. So it's really hard to put an exact number. I got to believe that it's probably 12. You might be in the 10 or 12 million dollar range, plus or minus. I would hope that it would be less than that, but sump pumps and drainage will be a very big part of the compliance under this consent decree. To date, we've been focusing on a lot of the sewer system, but as we move forward, drainage is becoming more critical and more a part of the program.
I'm just trying to get an idea for how far the $5 million would get us, and what we'd be looking at.
Probably.
Everybody has a sump pump is illegally connected. There's a lot of people that are properly connected.
That's a very good point.
Connected to the drain system outside to their yard or to the outside drainage source.
Yeah.
So you can't take for granted that. I would say out of 6,000 so homes, maybe talking about $3,000 or $4,000.
Homes, 3,000 or 4,000 homes needing a full.
Where they're not correct, where they're not properly connected. That's a very important point, that just because you have a sump pump in your home doesn't mean that it's connected in properly. It's something we just need to be able to look at so that we can make sure it's connected properly.
Okay. And as far as, is there any deadline or timeline that we need to be on for passing this? I know it sounds like there's a lot of hesitation to pass, these updates, and I'd rather kind of work through a solution that everybody is on board with rather than, just voting something down, especially given the impact in the future with the consent decree and the EPA potentially levying fines on us for not passing an ordinance. So I didn't know if there were any kind of deadline that we'd be looking at.
My we're probably 30 or 45 days since the original public hearing. I think that was December 10th was the first public hearing.
Yep.
Actually, no, I'm sorry. The public hearing was before that. Yeah. So you're probably up at 50 plus or minus days, 60 days.
Yeah. But we don't have a deadline as far as the EPA necessarily.
Not a specific date. I would say that what we're trying to do is get the regulation passed so that it's in place as we start to implement this sump pump program. So, you know, I'd like to see it resolved in the not too distant future. If that means that folks want to take it home and mull it over and have another discussion, I'm here to do whatever the council pleases in terms of that. But I would say that it's something that the city has to do. It's not going to get any easier. It's not going to change significantly. It really has to happen. As unpleasant as it may be for certain, you know, individual homes, it's very important for the city as a whole. So I would recommend that if you don't pass it tonight, we do it in the not too distant future.
Right, and I think we've been kicking the can down the road so much that we're in the position that we're in right now. And, you know, that's very easy to do with items that you don't see, such as, you know, sewer pipes and water pipes. So, you know, I do think that we have to take our medicine a little bit. And it's unfortunate. It's an unenviable position to be in. One last thing that I kind of grapple with what Councilor Guanasso mentioned about the city kind of doing its part is, has there been any conversation about the city maybe putting forward a good kind of faith effort with a portion of money that is outside of the SRF and outside of, you know, what we're looking at as an amount that could help with the $5 million? Has there been any discussion of additional funds being appropriated for this?
Yeah, the community assistance money was one I was thinking of. In terms, just overall in the bigger picture, if the city was to utilize their own funds, for example, and put aside like a pool of money to utilize,
yep.
That would still affect the water and sewer rates, because the money would have to be raised sort of through the water and sewer rates to establish that fund to do the work. One of the attractive things about the SRF program is not only the low rate to fund it, but it also has principal forgiveness. And in the last couple of years, in particular in the very first year, our principal forgiveness was on the order of 20 or 21%. So for the $6 million that the city borrowed, almost $1.2 million of that the city was forgiven, didn't have to pay back to the state. So actually the SRF fund and or the MWRA fund, where there's a portion of it that's grant money, is among the most advantageous programs for the city to utilize. So that's definitely part of it. And then in other areas, you know, in the normal course of business, for example, if the DPW was fixing a sewer break or a collapse and they saw a problem like that, I think they fix things as a regular course of business. So there may be instances where problems are being made to go away just by how the DPW goes about its normal day in doing their work.
Okay. And
Mr. Chairman.
Councilor Guanasso.
Mr. Chairman, we do have an enterprise fund. It has $1 million+ in it, so, I mean, so we can also lend a helping hand with that.
Councilor Guanasso, I agree with you, and I would also say that we also have, I think, over $2 million in outstanding debt to the water and sewer fund for folks that haven't paid their bill. So I know there's perhaps a collection process that we could do to help get some of that $2 million. I also think there might be an ability to take a look at nonprofits who use water and starting to charge the nonprofits that use water to be able to because I know the number of nonprofit properties in the city has increased, and they don't pay for water, so that might be another option to look at. So
I don't disagree.
So one item one addition or amendment that I'd like to make, and it's to Councilor Powers' point of some of the money any money that's seen as a savings in the future be kind of put back towards the amount of money that we have to help out the homeowner. So if we know that there's a portion of savings that we're looking at down the line that money be kind of reinvested to help out the folks who are going to be having to pay for some of these upgrades. So, I'd like to see that codified in the ordinance if that's amenable to you guys. And
As far as I go, I work at the city's pleasure, so things like that would be up to you as the lawmaking body. With respect to something like that, it seems more like a policy decision than an ordinance or a regulation. So I'm not a lawyer, I'm an engineer, and I'm not exactly sure how that all works. But to me, that's more of a policy issue that I'm not totally sure you could codify. The one point that I would make is that monies that we're going after through the SRF program, we're actually looking to use that money to work with homeowners to help this burden. So it wouldn't be solely on the homeowner to deal with some of these solutions. So that $5 million that we were talking about earlier is in fact seed money that can and will be used to help homeowners. To help homeowners. I can't say that it would pay for every single condition in every single instance, but we are looking to work with property owners to make this work for everybody and not be an unfair burden on them.
yeah, that's understandable. So I think what we're going to do right now is I'm going to hold this in committee, and we can have another meeting, and hopefully folks will mull it over, and we can think about some amendments that may make it more palatable for the body as a whole. I would rather see this passed than not. So if we can work out some compromise that might help us out, I would prefer to do that. So with that,
Councilor Rigo,
Councilor
just one
Ridd.
suggestion. I'd like to see the portions of this ordinance that have been very nicely outlined to us as amended with the deletions, et cetera. I'd like to see the portions that have the most impact as far as the EPA is concerned. In other words, the mandated portions of this ordinance, and then separate that perhaps with a different color or something like that, so we can see what we know we have to do and separate it from what maybe additions that are in here that we might consider not taking up.
I'm not certain that there are any, honestly, Councilor. I will go back and talk to Frank more about it, but
That's fine. If
I don't
know-
believe there are any.
It's a lot easier for us to say, well, we're stuck with this, if we know we're really stuck with it, than to say, are we stuck with this, or is this somebody's idea of a good idea that we may not think is a good idea? You follow what I'm saying?
I understand, and I think Frank wants to add something to that.
I think if you look at the first page, clear water drain connections, the previous ordinance identifies a number of illicit connections: foundation drains, area drains, downspouts, surface runoff or groundwater to a building. Sump pumps, for whatever reason, were not included years ago, but EPA has identified those as a priority for contributing waste stormwater into our sewer system.
Well,
And just to,
it says sump pumps here. What's a foundation drain if not a sump pump? I mean, I suppose it's the drain lacking the pump, but I don't see a problem with that necessarily. That's not what I'm talking about. I agree with you.
Yeah.
I'm just talking about the larger portions. It's obviously we're addressing sump pumps here, and to the extent that they're not included in our present ordinance, they absolutely have to be put in there. There's no doubt about
Right.
that.
right. And the rest is just legalese, just to make it look, to give it some sense. Protecting the city from liability, or when somebody goes into the property.
That's
From the
an
city.
important one, yeah.
That's very important. I mean, if you read through this, there's really nothing in here that's very radical. The only contentious section is this, as far as I can see, the city council, is the sump pumps. And actually, the law firm that's working with us on our consent decree helped put this together. So it was, so they made sure it was consistent with the EPA's regulations.
So you're suggesting that there's nothing in here that was devised in any way off the top of someone's imagination, other than after having consulted with the EPA regulations and perhaps grafted over some other towns' regulations that have been through this process?
That's
Is that-
correct,
Is that
yeah.
what you're suggesting? Everything in here is essentially mandated, if not every word, but every theory?
Absolutely.
I would agree with that.
That's all
too.
I wanted to know.
I'm not looking to create more work for myself or for the
No,
city.
but you know how things happen. Everybody gets their 2 cents in, and then they put a word in there, there's 5 words in there that really end up screwing somebody. And honest to God, that's what we're trying to avoid here completely. All right, I mean, I have to be frank about it. That's my biggest concern.
It's cut and dry. You have a sump pump. If you don't disconnect it, you get fined. But we indicated that we are identifying funds to help the homeowners correct these
Frank,
illicit
if
connections.
that was just it, then you could put a sentence in there. But that's unfortunately not it. I see that there are whole sections of this.
This is
this
what happens
ordinance
when
that
you have
been
attorneys
changed.
get involved and they start writing your ordinances for you.
Yeah, that's what I'm afraid, and that's exactly what I'm afraid of, exactly what I'm afraid of. That's a good idea. Shakespeare.
Thank you, Council Reardon. Council Powers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be very brief. Bob, you just mentioned several minutes ago that the condition of the ditches, the high water tables in the ditches somehow affects the water tables in the neighborhoods.
It absolutely can,
Okay.
that's
Now,
correct.
every year, we put approximately, and I think Frank will bear me out, $50,000 in the DPW budget for the cleaning and maintenance of culverts and ditches. Well, I realize the mayor is a manager and a good manager. I believe that some input from yourself as an engineer to the mayor of the importance of cleaning those culverts, removing the phragmites, removing the debris, the tires, the pallets and the lumber and stuff that gets in there would certainly go a long way in helping not only to reduce that water table, but eliminate flooding more in some of the low-lying neighborhoods, such as the Bay Road area down there and Oak Island and those areas. And also, there's a trash rack down there. That should probably be cleaned more frequently. And I would hope that you, in your conversations with the mayor regarding the drainage in the city of Revere, you would pass that on to him.
Absolutely, Councilor. And in fact, even in this fiscal year, we worked with the mayor and with the finance director to help the DPW increase funding for some of those maintenance items, because you not only have to put in the investment in the capital infrastructure, but then you have to keep it up. It's like your car. You have to change the oil and fix the tires and do those types of things.
$50,000 is not adequate to accomplish that.
I think there is more funding, and I think that some of the city stat work and the other things that we're doing to help track that will help identify what the right number should be moving forward.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Council Powers. Council Correggio.
Thank you, Chairman Arrigo. I'll be very brief. We have an ordinance here. I know we're going to have to vote on it one way or the other. But what bothers me with this whole thing is the MWRA, they keep raising the water rates. So we comply with all these regulations. I mean, what are they going to do for us, the taxpayer, the ratepayer, about trying to reduce these water rates? I mean, is there an end to the tunnel with raising of water rates and fees to the taxpayers? I mean, we're complying with everything they're supposed to comply with. I mean, what about the ratepayer? I mean, do they get a break once in a while? I mean, I don't see anything to help them out. Will this help water rates get reduced or stabilized?
Having this ordinance in place will help with stabilization, because the water that shouldn't be in the sewers, that you're paying a fee to MWRA that shouldn't be there, will be eliminated. So it will actually help your ratepayers by implementing this ordinance, Councilor.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilor Correggio. With that, I'm going to close tonight's meeting and request that we meet on January 28th at 5 p.m. No. Okay. What date will we be running up against the, our 90-day rule? Oh. Okay. All right, so,
I will be away the 2nd to the 9th of February, so if it was that Monday night, which is like the 4th,
yeah.
my wife and children may have a problem with me not being on vacation with them, so,
The, the, f- the 4th,
that would be the 11th of
the
February, I
the
think, that
11th of
Monday night.
February. Do-
I would be here the 11th, Counselor, I just couldn't be here the 4th, so. So we could get it out of committee and then
So-
refer it up at that point,
Yeah.
maybe?
Okay, so we'll plan to meet on February 11th, 2013.
Thank you all.